From the land to Grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the closing market report. It is the 25th day of April, 2025. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk about the commodity markets with Mike Zuzolo. He's at globalcomresearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas, and Eric Snodgrass will be here too to take a look at the weather forecast. If you can stay with us for the whole of the hour, you will hear all of our Commodity Week program with our guest, Colin Waters from the Illinois Corn Growers Association, Shane Holtor with Logic Ag Marketing out of Alta, Iowa, and Aaron Curtis from Midco in Bloomington, Illinois. If not, you can hear the whole of the program up online right now at willag.org. That's WILLAG.org.
Todd Gleason services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
May corn for the day settled at $4.78 and 3/4 cents, a penny and a half higher. July up a penny and a half as well at $4.85 and a half, and new crop December 3/4 cent lower. Settlement price at $4.55 and 3/4 cents per bushel. May soybeans today down 3 1/4. It finished at $10.49 and 3/4. July at $10.59 and a quarter, 2 3/4 lower. In November down a half at $10.35. The bean meal $1.30 higher. The bean oil 37 cents lower. And July soft red winter wheat up a half at $5.45. The hard red at $5.51, a 1/4 cent higher in that harvest month July contract. Mike Zuzolo, globalcomresearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas, now joins us to discuss the marketplace. Hi, Mike. Thank you much for being with us. It's been a couple of weeks since we've talked. I know you've been watching the marketplace really closely. What has been top of your mind over that 2-week period?
Yeah, that's a great question, Todd. It's kind of nice sometimes to be able to take a step back and talk a little less frequently so that you can get a little bit more rhythm and routine, especially in these trade tariff times. And I think what we've seen here the last couple of weeks is a continuation of more pressure on China, less pressure on other trading partners. It does feel as though in the last few days, maybe the dam is starting to break as far as the tariff pressures. Even China and the United States are now on again, off again, instead of just not talking at all. And there are supposed to be some really close trade deals coming, whether it's Japan or South Korea or India. I would say, to answer your question more directly, is we're really at a point now with planting that we do need these trade deals, as President Trump's 100 days is coming up here next week. I think the whoever wins the battle of getting most or the key nations trade agreements bilaterally will then be able to take more of an offensive position and have more leverage between the U.S.-China issue. I think that's going to be the hardest nut to crack and continue to be, because there's just so many things you'll have to unpack. And so when I look at it from that perspective, when the last 2 weeks have developed, it seems to me that between the corn planting, the export demand, I think it's become more clear that the South American crop is going to be there, especially for soybeans. And also the idea that did China and Mexico both buy more ahead of the tariffs and ahead of even right after President Trump's victory in the election. And it seems with Friday's purchases of corn by Mexico and the last 4 weeks of export demand news, it does look like China has probably bought ahead in soy. Mexico has not, would be my take. So I'd still put fundamentals on corn as the best commodity out there. So that puts me in a situation where I really want to get some hedges in place for soybeans. If we can continue this rally next week, both last of the old crop and get more deeply into the new crop. One thing I did find out from USDA that I wanted to pass along to you and the listeners was I did send them a note asking them what they would do in the WASDE report for May, because the Department of Energy took down a bunch of their expectations for 2025 energy demand, and they said it was specifically because of the tariffs. And that got me to thinking, okay, we're going to get the new 25-26 supply-demand fundamentals. Will USDA do the same thing? And the contact that I talked to said, look, I don't run the WAOB, but I reached out to him on the exact same thing. And they said whatever's on the books is what we're going to have to look at. So I would not be surprised to see some demand adjustments. And I don't know if they're going to be higher or lower. I would guess lower for some of these key commodities. So something to think about between now and mid-May.
Yeah, and USDA has signaled that's what they will do every month in the World Ag Supply and Demand Estimates. The World Ag Outlook Board has, since March and April, I guess, just 2 months, has said whatever's on the books is what we will use at that point. Could show some devastating impact, I would think, for soybean exports.
It's a real possibility, and if we do straighten out the planting window, because there's still quite a bit of an issue with the weather models being highly inaccurate in the western corn belt and the hard red wheat belt, now turning drier again as of Friday afternoon for those two areas, and bringing up the moisture levels for the upper Mississippi River Valley and Ohio River valleys. Both of them already so saturated. But if we would straighten planning out and then all of a sudden get a negative report, I think you want to be in a position to have something underneath you in case that happens.
Is corn under as much of an issue as it's related to that demand side? Mexico would be the place, but I don't recall that they have a tariff. Did they place a tariff on goods coming across, particularly agricultural goods coming across the border?
No, not to my knowledge. And Mexico did buy about 285,000, I think, of corn on Friday. About half of that was this current year. There's been more renewed observations in Mexico about northern Mexico's drought worsening, actually creating water problems for the southern U.S. because their drought is so bad. I just don't think that they're in a position, and I think the Trump administration played it smartly to lay off of Canada and Mexico, and if they were going to go after China, keep the rest of our trade and agriculture very well suited. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, so a 10% tariff from the United States on products coming in from other places. But as you'll hear in Commodity Week, if you can stay with us for the whole hour, Aaron Curtis reminds me gently that it is about the tariffs the other countries impose on products coming from us that really matter. So China is the one that comes top of mind because that tit for tat between China and the United States pushed things to what people have referred to as an embargo. What else are you watching in the marketplace at this time?
I would say the cattle market has got to be talked about. We made some new record highs at least twice this week in fat cattle with the pressure coming off Wall Street. The pork and bean trade, the beans and the hogs came back around nicely for the most part this week, I think because of the easing China fears. But the hogs came off of the idea that they were going to pressure the cattle. Like the soybeans, I think we're getting into pretty stratospheric areas. Seasonally, it gets tough to keep this kind of market rallying. So soybeans and cattle are the most important things to be watching for me in the next 7 to 10 days as far as getting floors underneath me if I can get a little bit more up on this market.
July wheat has been trending down since June of last year. At the bottom of the marketplace, I guess sideways at the moment?
Yeah, and I think we could say pretty safely it doesn't have a weather premium in it.
It does not. Hey, thank you much. Anything else before I let you go?
No, thanks, Todd.
All right, that is Mike Zuzolo. He is with GlobalComResearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas. Let's return now to last Monday's USDA Weekly Crop Progress Report. Brad Summa is with USDA NASS, that's located in St. Louis. He is the statistician responsible for both Illinois and Missouri. Planting progress in the two states as of earlier this week showcased the relative difference between the weather conditions east and west of the river. Illinois, for instance, was about average. However, Missouri, like much of the western Corn Belt, was running ahead of pace, says Summa.
In Missouri, we're up in both. Corn, we're already at 33%, which is up 8% from the 5-year average of 25. And soybeans, we are 15% planted compared to the 5-year average of 6. So we're up 9 points there. So yeah, we're off to a decent start, I would say. And I would also add, I am continually amazed at how fast farmers can get things done when they have that window of opportunity. I've seen years where you'll have weeks of rain and wet weather and things kind of get behind, and then they have that brief window of opportunity where things dry out, and man, they can make up for lost time.
On that note, Summa reflected on what happens when fields are wet and flooded.
for the big picture, as far as crop production, it's not as devastating as it may seem because there's a small percent of that cropland that's actually close to a river that's flooding. We see this a lot of times in flood years. People think there's just, the crop's going to be devastated. But again, things dry out fast. Farmers can get back in the fields and make up for time quickly. And there's just not a huge chunk of cropland that is subject to that flooding near the rivers.
Brad Summa is with USDA NASS. He's located in St. Louis, Missouri, and is a statistician that oversees reports for both states. Our thanks go to NAFB member Cesar Delgado for providing us with the audio for this report. Eric Snodgrass now joins us from Nutrien Ag Solutions and Agrable to talk about the weather forecast and what's been happening across the Corn Belt. Hi, Eric. Thank you for being with us. Farmers probably out of the field today. They'll be wanting some planting windows to open back up. Where do you see that happening across the Midwest?
Yeah, so we had a pretty wet Easter weekend, and that's also going to get folks wondering if we're going to see wet conditions every weekend, for the next 7, right? There's that old wives' tale about that. And the reality is we got rain moving through now, and then we have a system that's coming through California this weekend that's going to get to us by next Monday, Tuesday. So we still have a couple more chances that are going to really kind of limit field work. Now, if you have higher ground, I know it's kind of hard to find in Illinois, but if you have it and it's draining quickly, you might get a window to open back up because the temperatures are going to be warm in between, which is going to allow things to dry down a little quicker. But the good news is that once we start the month of May, I think that the atmosphere has really shifted the jet stream pretty far to the north. That's a good signal for more mild conditions. And it also takes away the risk of like these repeated, events where you're getting 2 rainfall events a week or more, and they start to stretch out a little bit. In fact, some of the week 2 forecast data, which would be May 3rd through the 10th or something like that, they're starting to show a drier signal for us. So I like where things are going, but the reality is, we've lately had a lot of these windows tighten up pretty tight because of rainfall events, especially last weekend. And a lot of folks, I think, missed an opportunity this week because the soils just weren't ready to be worked yet after such heavy rains last Sunday. So we're still looking for those windows. I just think they start to show up once we get into May, which is good news.
So I do have some questions about some drier areas in the Corn Belt. Thank you to Agrable. Yeah. I have a whole series of fields across the Midwest. The one place that really seems like it is dry, and I follow a field in Freeport, and from the first of the month, now they've had about 2.3 inches there. However, they've only had not quite 5 inches of rainfall since the beginning of the year, and they're normally 4 inches more than that, around 9. So what's happening within that far northern part of Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly, you don't have to go too much farther north of us and start to see the lack of subsurface soil moisture. And when you look at these next 7 days, the forecast keeps drying out for that region. In other words, we don't continue to see higher rainfall totals as we've seen elsewhere. So we've kind of missed that area, and given the drier subsurface soil, it gets us concerned about what that could mean, later on in the season. Now, like I said, there is still moisture coming, and the recent the 2.3 or so that they got, they're going to use that, and they're going to use that good Illinois soil to make a good run about it. But that's not the only spot, right? I got a huge chunk of Nebraska that's been incredibly dry the last 2 weeks. Most of the Dakotas have been dry, except parts of North Dakota had a couple of weather systems roll through there lately. And so we still have this patchwork of drought. In fact, the new drought monitor released, we've only seen about a 5% reduction in total area in the month of April in drought. And don't forget, where our heaviest rains were mid-south, getting over to parts of Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, the Red River Valley of the South, where they've had just tremendous flooding. So it's something to take note of, that you would not look back on this spring and to say, oh, it was so ideal for the whole of the Corn Belt. There's places that have had way too much, and other spots where I think they would have been sharing some of that rainfall in the flooded out areas. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Todd.
Okay, so a couple of other things. It's been warm, and folks have planted. There's moisture. That means the corn and or soybeans is likely to pop out of the ground fairly quickly. That will scare people just a little bit on the idea of, hey, wait a second, what if we get a cold air mass that drops down here? Do we have any risk of frost coming?
None that I can find. And overall, if you look over the next 15 days, I think that Central Illinois will pick up around 250 GDDs, which means if you got some in the ground, it should get out with that kind of heat. So we start to worry about this. And I got a good question from a guy last week out in Nebraska because he was rapidly planting ahead of some rain that was coming to eastern Nebraska. And he said, Eric, I'm really worried about this I think it's May 12th, there's a full moon. He says, what's going on with frost and full moons? I said, well, it's really not that the full moon brings the frost. It's the fact that if you can see the full moon, it's clear skies, light winds, and high pressure, which allows the ground to quickly lose its heat, radiative heat transfer, and you just get a frost event. So that's the reality of it is if clouds are out and if the wind is up, then you don't get the frost. If it's clear and calm, you can get it. But I don't see anything. The jet stream is way far to the north. We have plenty of mild air that keeps coming up from the south. And I just don't see frost risk. I mean, I was maybe looking at May 4th as dropping some cooler weather in, but not that frost. I mean, we may touch upper 30s again at some point, but I don't see low 30s, and that's a bit of good news overall.
Indeed. So since we're in the month of May, what does the rest of May and the summer maybe look like? Have you thought about that much?
I have a lot. And I'm going to tell you something. The models right now are trying to get us drier in May. Now, most times we don't care about that. All right, bring in some drier weather, especially if April was wet. Let's get everything finished and get going. And then everybody says as soon as it's about a week after they plant, like bring back the rain. I think they think I can control it. I cannot. Just to be clear with everybody listening. I wish I could, but I can't. But the issue here, Todd, is that I'm going to throw out some analog years we've talked about before. And these years are chosen on two things. How close do they match what we've seen in March and April? And how closely do they match the ocean temperature patterns? So everybody listening, here they are. I've got 96 and 99. I've got 06 and 08. I've got 11 and 12, and I got 17 in the mix. You put all those years together in composite, and they look like what we are experiencing right now. Both ocean temperatures and the moisture. Now, here's the risky part. There's two of those years, which of course stuck out in everybody's heads, which are 11 and 12. Of that list, those are the only 2 years that had below trend national yields, which means the other the other 5 had above trend years or trend yield on those years. So where was the heat? Mainly Western Corn Belt, mainly the Northern Plains, and that's where I think the risk is going to be this upcoming summer. Now, of course, all of this can change in a moment, and that's why we talk every Friday, but right now, I'm really concerned about those years being analog years, putting more heat and drought stress west of the Mississippi than east. But we'll watch it together, and if that changes, we'll know.
We'll check in another 7 days. Thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Eric Snodgrass is with Nutrient Ag Solutions in Daggerville. Joined us here on this Friday edition of the Closing Market Report that comes to you from Illinois Public Media. It is public radio for the farming world. Find us online at willag.org, willag.org. There you'll find our daily programming to listen to anytime you'd like, and you'll also find our Commodity Week program. If you can stick with us, you'll hear that for the rest of this hour. Otherwise, you'll hear a portion of it, and you can find the whole of it online again at willag.org. And many of these radio stations will carry it over the weekend. Online, you can also read the latest information from the crop scientist, the animal scientist, and the agricultural economist at the University of Illinois. 2 ways to do that at our website, again, willag.org, or you can find it at farmdocdaily.illinois.edu.